Hey everyone, and welcome to my last video of COM 322 for the summer session. I am so thrilled that this class is coming to an end, and you must be too. I know you've all been working really hard, and I appreciate it, and I hope you have some time after the semester ends to celebrate your accomplishments. All right, this Prezi and video will do some final exam review and give you some final kind of housekeeping reminders and make sure that we are all on the same page as the semester comes to a close. So really essential information. Don't forget that your final exam is on Friday on Blackboard, just like exam 1. It is on the last day of the class, and it runs from 8 a.m. until 11:50 p.m. And remember, I don't do makeup exams. You need to allow for 100 minutes, and just like the quizzes, there's no backtracking, and the academic dishonesty policy applies. But before you get there, you're probably going to want to make sure that you've studied your quiz answers, both your own and the ones that are posted on Blackboard, and maybe even some of the quiz questions. Maybe take a look back at Test 1, not because content on Test 1 will be on the final exam, but just to refresh your memory on what types of questions I ask. You'll remember that you need to both define a concept and apply that concept. And you're going to want to take a look at the Blackboard discussion board with the sample test questions that you and your peers did. That'll really serve a huge help for you to be able to review. And when all else fails, just make sure your short answers and essay answers are very specific and rooted in class material. Don't forget to turn in your infographic also on the last day of class, and I will try to get those grades done as soon as possible. You have my word. Hopefully you've realized that I turn things around pretty quickly throughout the semester, and I plan to do that with your final grade as well. All right, there's a couple things that I want to just refresh on from the last couple quizzes that we've taken if you haven't done so already. And it is nearing the end of the week. Make sure you take a look at the sample quiz answers that I post on Blackboard. But I want to really call your attention to that Food Inc. quiz that you are taking and that you've been doing about the food cycle. So a food cycle is when, because prices for food are expected to be so cheap, the people making them then don't get paid a very high wage. And so then the only food they can afford is kind of cheap food. And then that cheap food turns into kind of an unhealthy lifestyle. And then we're in this vicious cycle, right? So the whole food system is kind of propped up on this idea that food needs to be cheap. And the only way to make food cheap is if we are cutting corners on costs elsewhere in the cycle. So make sure you've really thought about that and head back to your reading or even brush up on that Food Inc. quiz or that Food Inc. video if that's not clear to you. Also, remember regarding food, there's kind of a pretty big divide, or it's this fine line between appropriation and appreciation. Appreciation is when you really kind of honor the cultural traditions and circumstances that surround the food. Appropriation is when a dominant culture just kind of takes it and calls it their own. And we see that happening a lot with food. And also food is a big business, not only in terms of farmers and the cost of production of food, but also in terms of the advertisements and what big businesses kind of try to do to entice consumers and especially children in order to buy that food. All right, we should be pretty good on content. So let's get into the final exam. Final exam contains 20 multiple choice questions that are about 2 points each. There are 10 short answers, right? So I really expect that you know this material. Remember that the exams they shouldn't be considered take-home exams, right? Where you have all the time in the world to read the material. I assume that you know the material and you are using your notes just to brush up on some things. So you will complete 10 short answers that are worth 5 points each, and then you have one essay, just like exam 1, that's worth 10 points each. I might give you some just really simple things like this where you have to have a definition or an example or both, right? So third wave feminism is something we started this part of the semester with, right? Third wave feminism is this kind of new brand of feminism that we're seeing that is really steeped in media. A lot of times it's associated with younger people, but not always. I'm not super young and I kind of consider myself a third wave feminism. Third wave feminism is comprised of a variety of facets, right? So a lot of times it's more individualized, it's less formal, it's more multicultural, it's more tuned into issues of race and class and gender and sexuality than maybe our first and second wave sisters were. So if you don't know what third wave feminism is and you can't give me an example of a third wave feminist text, one that a lot of people cite is Sex and the City, make sure you go back to that Girl Power Prezi. There's a small video with Naomi Wolf in it that explains third wave feminism. Black excellence is something that people had a little bit of trouble with, and it was in the sports unit. So Black excellence is kind of this idea that's a little bit negative that talks about how People of color really have to be like faster, better, stronger, better behaved to even get the same type of respect as white people or white athletes in this case. But I don't know if you're familiar with Black Twitter, but Black Twitter is where people of color go on Twitter and really try to reclaim some of this cultural narrative. And they've definitely have done that with Black excellence. So make sure you're really going back to that reading and back to that Prezi about Serena Williams and Tiger Woods. The cycle of food I just explained on the last slide, right? It is predicated upon this notion that cheap food props up the system and leads to low wages, which means that the only thing people can afford is cheap food, which means we have to keep producing food that's cheap, and they get, keep getting paid low wages. And it's this really vicious cycle. Remember the tension present in girl power. Right? We have all these shows that are really showing kind of just like strong, amazing female characters. But then on the flip side of that, corporations have realized that girl power and this kind of feminist narrative can be used to sell things, right? So it's like buy Pantene soap, or shampoo, and you too can be an empowered woman, right? So I really on the exam will be able to expect you that you can talk about girl power, not only the specific themes in the television show, right? That they're the lead, they're complicated, they don't often have a male figure, male counterpart in a romantic way, but also kind of the flip side of that, like what happens when the media landscape becomes so saturated with girl power that it's just another kind of tool for corporations to sell us things. And remember those tenets of hypermasculinity that are predicated upon a particular body type, an ability or desire to take risk, and the fact that they privilege, sex and kind of callous relationships over love. And you should be able to definitely think of TV characters or movie characters or book characters that are maybe empowered girls or women or hypermasculine men. All right, on the essay, I want to make sure that you understand the structure of the essay. So if you could maybe kind of commit this to memory, right? Typically in the essays, I'm going to ask you if you understand what's happening in the text, if you can link it to class material, and that's really specific class material. So here's one or two elements from our reading, and some of these authors that have said it, and here's the link between the two. And a lot of times I do want you to offer up an opinion. And so you can either do that in the introductory paragraph or in the last paragraph, but make sure you're doing those things, right? You're offering up some sort of thesis statement. You're talking about whether or not you agree or disagree, and you're making the link between class material and the artifact or the text that I'm showing you, right? So commit this structure to the essay to memory. And take a look at this magazine cover that has a female hockey player, Hilary Knight, who's pretty famous. And see if you can use that essay structure to analyze this magazine cover. What would you say? What are you thinking? How would you link it to class material? And do you think it's a good or a bad representation of women? And if you can do that, you should do pretty well on the exam. I look forward to reading your answers, and thanks for a fabulous semester. Bye, everybody.